Welcome back, you guys. If you received one of these Winter Flurry watercolor palettes from Jack's Watercolor on the monthly subscription, then get it out because we are going to be painting with this beautiful, beautiful watercolor palette. I'm so excited about it. As you know, if you didn't see this swatching video, go back and take a look at it. I will link it in the description box below so that you can see all of the colors in the palette and what I had to say about salt and using salt. Now, in your watercolor subscription, as you know, you already received some beautiful pieces of Fabriano 100% cotton professional grade watercolor paper, some amazing gold trimmed card envelopes so that you can make a couple of really beautiful cards. There are additional colors in the envelopes coming out right now. I just released a really beautiful seafoam green with leaves on the interior. I always get different ones. And then for February, I'll probably get pink and maybe red. I'm not sure. I did release red in some of the subscriptions. So some of you I think are getting blue and some of you are getting red in these upcoming subscriptions. So just enjoy. I kind of mixed it up and sent surprises out to everybody. There's also some 100% cotton sample paper here. This is great to be able to test your watercolor on and also just try out different things that I'm trying and showing you in the videos. There's also a watercolor brush in these subscriptions. So over the last few subscriptions, I've been sending out detail brushes this time because I think a lot of you guys already have like a wash brush. So I thought maybe we would stock up on some of these smaller versions so that you could do the fine lines. And this is to paint like the more detail items in the watercolor. So you would get out your own wash brush, or you can always order them if you really, really like this brush. I happen to really love it. As you know, if you're paying attention to my videos, I've been using the size 12 in this brush a lot. The 10 is also fabulous. The 8 is really great too. This is a really nice size in comparison. I tend to like the larger the belly, so the bigger the brush. I'm used to using that, but if you don't have a really light hand and you can't use the point very well, then it might get in your way. But as far as a wash brush, this is a great wash brush. There's also some red wash brushes on the website that I highly recommend. I love this style and it's just such a cool brush to have. I have it in all the sizes. And another brush that you probably will find really helpful are the angular shaders. They come in sets of 3. I love them because they not only do fabulous leaves and florals, but they also remove color really well. And I haven't found a brush over the years that removes color so consistently, except the old Winsor Newton brushes that they don't even make anymore. So these were really good for that. So I keep them in stock in the watercolor store, just in case you guys need brushes and you're looking for, you know, well-priced brushes that you can count on. These ones I've been beating up for months and so far no problems. I'm really happy with them. So let's build on this idea. Recently in one of my streaming groups where I do Q&As, I have a tutorial group that is, we do a lot of live and also pre-recorded video on questions and answers. So we kind of like mapped up a little creepy idea for a forest using the salt and the colors from this palette, and I'm going to build on this and make it even better today. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I've already done some sampling and I love the way this watercolor paints on the Fabriano. So I'm just going to grab the other piece of Fabriano. I split mine in half so that I could do tutorials on the good paper. I really love it. This is my favorite. One of the questions in the tutorial group also was, this paper seems different than the Fabriano that comes in the pad, and it is. This is from the really, really large professional grade sheets. It's very heavyweight paper and it's 100% cotton. It is a different paper than you would get if you ordered just like standard Fabriano 100% cotton pads. It's just excellent. What can I say? It's the cream of the crop. I do sell it by the pieces whenever I do these runs in the monthly watercolor subscription, anything I have extra, I'll put in the watercolor store so you guys can get like full sheets, double this size, and then also folded cards with envelopes when I have extras. So just stock up whenever you see them available in the paper section. They are this paper, not the standard Fabriano that you get if you just order on Amazon. It's a little different. They have a lot of different grade papers, you know. So for this tutorial, we're going to be using the salt and mixing up a couple of colors here. So this one I did in just the straight blue. So this blue, as I did say before in the swatching video, the ultra that I mixed up for this takes to salt really well. You can see the results of salt on here, and tips and tricks on it is you just kind of trial and error a little bit, right? Like put a lot of the color on there, let it dry, and at different variations of drying time, you're gonna get different results. This is gonna be less, if it's dried a little bit more before the salt hits it, it will come out like this. If it's a little more wet, you'll get a little more pushing of the color. If it's really, really wet, it'll be more billowy. So it's kind of trial and error though, you know, and it doesn't work with every watercolor, just certain watercolors. But I noticed that mine, it works with all of the granulating colors or any of the really bold colors. It works really, really well with. So I would say 99% of the colors in my watercolor store that I make, salt works amazingly well with, because they're just really highly pigmented. They're so well made. I take such care in making them, and I make very, very small patches. It's actually something I curse myself for every time I do it, because I'm like, why did I start making so many of these physical watercolors? Because it takes so much time. So for the background color, since I already did a bright, bright blue one, I'm actually going to make a little more like moody shade. And this shade is going to be made with just a touch of the Mars Brown mixed into the blue. You can see how it's making it like a lot more Prussian looking. So just wetting and adding until I get to like kind of like a deep blue, you know, like a really, really moody blue. Let's try that. And we're just going to, we're just going to load that up on the paper. This is wet on dry. I don't need to really, I don't really need to pre-wet it as much on this paper, because I'm using a pretty fluffy wash brush, mixing a little more blue. So I have a few variations of color in this. And again, I kind of have a little more knowledge of the palette than just right now, because we did the swatching video, and also because I did a little tester video answering some Q&As during a live stream. So I kind of had an idea of how I wanted to move forward with this. So I'm gonna wash this out just a bit so that this is lighter and this is darker. I'm gonna add a little more of the blue here. So just keep mixing, mixing, mixing. And I'm just dropping in color, you know, so that I have a very moody kind of look. There we go. Okay, so on this one, one of the things you can do, and I didn't bring my clip, I need my little gold clip to hold this, but one of the things you can do is you can scrape in a little bit of your pattern. And I do that a lot when I'm going to drop salt while it's just kind of drying a little bit, because you want it to dry ever so slightly so that you get more of the variations, you know? So to scratch out our tree, I'm actually going to just scrape in some lines for the tree. Good. And then this is going to be the line that the tree sits on. And then let's just bring the tree up here and out. And it's kind of cool this way because wherever you scrape the Fabriano, it literally is going to paint, you know, like it's just starting to give me some interesting texture within. And as it dries, it's going to be like the drying area is going to be more white, where the wet areas, see, like this is dry up here, is going to be like something different. And also it kind of gives me a feel for like, okay, it's time to add the salt, right? So this area, I don't want salt, but here I do want salt. So let's take some salt out of our packet and we're just gonna sprinkle. Now I'm gonna sprinkle more salt. No, let's just get it in my hand. I'm gonna sprinkle more salt in this area here, a lot more, to make it a little more heavy. And then here, I'm gonna put it almost like we're gonna make leaves on the tree, right? We just want it like a little bit up here, but heavier down here. Now what you're gonna notice is different areas are gonna have different dry times, and as different areas have a little more dry, like this is a little more wet and this is a little more dry, some of it's gonna develop differently, and it's kind of cool. I like watching that. So meanwhile, this is starting to dry, so let's go ahead and mix up a shadowy color for our tree. And what I did is I'm still mixing the blue with the brown just to see what's going on. And this is still wet here, you can tell. So we're just going to kind of develop out the shadowiness of our tree. And we're going to bring the shadow right down over this area. Just kind of smooth it out. And I can tell, like, see some of these areas where the color is just bleeding out. It's just not all the way dry, but that's okay because I kind of want a mix of things for my tree, like branches for my tree that are kind of blended, right? And some that are not. I think it's kind of a neat look. I'm going to let the tree kind of go off the page a little bit up here. So let's mix some more color. Also notice the quality of the color in here. You notice how it's really saturated. That makes a real big difference in the way these things turn out. So if you're mixing colors and you're just kind of finding out about us for the first time, or you're not using my colors, if you're mixing colors and you're not getting a really good salt effect, it has a lot to do with the paper, the salt, and the watercolor. Some watercolors just don't have the kind of quality you need to get some of these more masterful effects going on, you know? It really does just matter. So experiment. A lot of these effects are, you know, all about experimenting. And then noticing what works and what doesn't, you know? So when I say, you know, look at the dry time, look at the amount of watercolor that is on your paper in some areas. Look at the quality of your watercolor. Is it ink or is it real pigmented watercolor? Like this is obviously real pigmented watercolor. So it is going to be a lot different. So I'm just taking the end of my brush and just developing this out. Now this brush is very, very thick. So I'm holding it right here on the silver part, and I'm kind of using my wrist to rest here and just striking down, and that's giving me some of those sharp edges that I want to develop my little spooky tree. And then just gonna bring that out. Then in the background, I'm gonna make a little more brown to it, a little more light gray. And I'm actually gonna try and get some creepy little trees back here. Now I'm just dragging the very, very tip. And another thing you can do, if the color looks a little bit dark as far as weight and you're not confident that it's going to dry light, you can always take a little bit of your paper towel and just slightly blot it, and that will really draw it into the background and make it kind of like a cool little shadowy effect, you know? Same thing here. If you feel like some of the areas just are a little dark and you want to build up the color rather than just have them, you know, just bam, then you can always just take a little bit of your paper towel and dry it back a little bit. Or you can take an angular shader and also get, you know, a similar effect. Now I'm kind of like darkening up my shadow a little bit because I just really like that look there. Let's give it a little more blue, a little more brown. You can notice I did a real monochromatic one, and I had talked about this on the live stream that I do like the brown and the blue together. I think it looks really cool, but I kind of just am attracted, me personally, to a little more monochromatic looks in these winter paintings. So for me, I just wanted to do like a variation, like a more custom variation of the colors by mixing them together. I'm just developing here. Like, of course, this area has salt on it, but now that I'm painting over it, that salt is not really going to develop much at all where I'm painting. It's like overall it's doing really, really cool things, but we're not going to see where this is going to go compared to this one until it's completely dry. So another thing you can do, you can see it's not dry the way the watercolor is taking to the paper. And that just shows me that we don't really have the effect on the salt that we are going to end up with in the end. And I can just kind of see that just by adding some color. So let's take a little break, let this dry, and then we'll come back and see what we got, and then we'll finish our painting. Okay, so we're back and we're almost dry. Now you can see this is an overall different effect. Really, really different from just the plain blue. And I wanted you guys to see this because I know you're gonna have a lot of questions, and some of you are gonna be like, mine didn't turn out like that. Well, that's because when you mix watercolors, it's not always gonna be the same effect all the time. Same paper, same watercolor, but different mix and a different layout of the salt. So you can see where I went really heavy here, it kind of sucked in and gave me a little bit of like a speckled effect throughout all of it, where it pulled a little bit of the blue, but also kind of stayed in the gray zone, but was not nearly as dramatic, pushing the color out as it did with here. And that's because this ultra blue has a certain kind of pigment that can be pushed really, really well, where the brown has a little more staining. So something that's a little more staining is going to have a little smaller push, right? So even though there's effect there and there's a lot of little lights and a lot of texture, it's not the exact same effect. So this is where trial and error really comes in, and knowing what you're looking at really comes in. So you're gonna have different effects, different textures, no matter what you try. Let's try another one with the blue so that you guys can see. And I also did a little sample here. Now these are still drying, but you can see how there's a lot more texture can come on where just the ultra splits it. But then when you start adding ultra brown to it, the ultra plus brown, where it's mostly brown, has very little effect. Where it's 75% ultra and 25 brown, it has smaller effect because it's not pushing the color like it does with the ultra. And that's interesting, right? Now this is probably going to answer a lot of questions here as far as people trying salt effects on different watercolors, because the effect might be there, but maybe it's not the exact same effect you're looking for. So if you're looking for a really, really dramatic effect, then just use the ultra blue. And I believe you can also use like the violet, and that will do the same thing as this, but we can try it out. If you'd like to, just let me know and I'll do another video for you. So before we go, let's do the ultra one with a mix of a color palette that I think looks really, really good with the ultra blue, just so that you have it as a sample. So I'm just going to flip this over because the paper is just delicious. I love it. We're going to go straight with the ultra. Remember, we don't want to mix it with anything because we want this really, really dramatic effect, right? So just straight with ultra. And actually, if I remember here, I can also, you see how bold and really, really deep the color is? Yeah, that makes a huge difference. But this particular, like I said, this ultramarine is a really cool one to use with water effects because it just takes to it so well. The salt really can push the texture, and that's how you get those really dramatic bits, you know? So I'm going light to dark and making it real dramatic, laying it in real heavy here because I want those salt effects. And what we want is we want just it to push it right off. Now we're gonna let this pretty much dry before we start adding in our tree, because we've already done it the other way and we don't need the tree dispersing as we go in, and I don't really need to scratch it in. I pretty much know what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and add the salt effect. So right here, I'm going to pour it in my hand so I have a little more control. So I'm going to do on very, very wet watercolor, and then here I'm going to make it a little more sparse. And again, this is sopping wet over on this corner, so we can throw it here just so that you can see. And maybe we'll put a little more right there. And again, maybe we'll put a little more here and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we're gonna let this dry and then we'll come back and see what happens to it. Okay, I'm just checking back in. It's not completely dry, but you can already see how it's developing and the difference. So we're getting a more consistent result because it is just pure ultra blue, right? There's nothing else weighing down the tint of the watercolor or making it like not able to be pushed out. I also did a little variation, right? So I did like the violet so that you can see what that looks like, as well as the dusk pink to see what that, and then mix the ultra in between and just kind of made it part of these two and put some salt on it. Now it's still very, very wet, so it's too early to tell on this one. We're gonna keep looking at that as it develops, but you can see already how just the ultra really has the effect because the salt is able to interact with watercolor and push it out, where once we added another color to here, the effect is much different. It just doesn't give you, it like stains it, right? It almost stains it and makes it like unable to push it as much. So you do have to like continue to develop your ideas with trial and error, and that's always how it is. You know, I also noticed that when I toss the watercolor, like put the watercolor in and then tossed the salt in certain directions, it kind of like pushes in certain directions, which is kind of fun, right? Like you drop it right on, but then in areas where like I tossed it forward, it kind of went forward, and it's starting to, can you see what it's doing? It's starting to like develop that way. And I really love that too, something to think about. Areas that were more wet and less watercolor still gave us the effect because of the color, but it also gave us kind of like a nice little blur, right? A little more tufty. This is still really, really wet, so it's too early to tell. As well as this, you can kind of just tell, you can feel it with your fingers, really cool. And that just means it's just way, way too early. You'll see, I think some of this is going to define even just as much as this when we get towards the end here. So let's take another little break, and I'll be right back again, and real time, so that you can see what this looks like. Okay, looks like we're dry. So as you can tell on the cheaper paper, which is also 100% cotton, even the blue develops much differently. So you do have to do a little trial and error. Remember, other variations that happened here is it's a little more wet. The paper takes differently with the water versus the watercolor. So even though we do have a lot of development within these areas for that texture, it still isn't as dramatic as on the really nice Fabriano paper. So even this, you see how different it is? It's a lot different development in the color. And I wanted to go over this with you because it's pretty consistent that on the cheaper paper, like sampling paper, it's not going to be the same result that you're seeing on the Fabriano paper. So that's really important, because you know, you have to manage your expectations and realize that like if you use really good quality paper, yeah, some of these effects are going to look a lot different, and probably you're looking for something that has a lot more variation like this or this, but this is that Fabriano paper that I sent you with the cards. Also carry some of it in my store, so if you do want some, I do have some extra pieces that you can buy. Otherwise, you're going to wrestle a little bit on the cheaper paper or sampling paper, so just keep that in mind as you sample up your designs. The dramatic effect will happen on this one once you get from here to here. Okay, so now that this is dry and we kind of know what we're looking at, let's go ahead and scrape the salt off. So pretty, it looks so good. Love it. And we can do a lot of different things. You can literally draw your trees leading up to some of these if you wanted this to look like it had, you know, leaves on it. I'm not, because it's just winter, right? So now that we're done with our salt effect and we're not worried about it being wet, I'm gonna mix a variation of this color. But I don't want it all the way brown because I've already tried that, and I'm not crazy about the starkness, you know, the brightness of the brown against the blue. I kind of want like this really interesting, like deeper shadowy blue. So I'm getting at that just by mixing in the brown with the blue until I find that really nice neutral. And if you want it to lean more brown, you can add more brown. If you want it to lean more blue, you can just add more blue. If you want it to be a little bit lighter, just dilute it with some water. So this is a good start. Let's try this color. Okay, so first we need just to put in like the first of the tree line. But we also want to remember as far as where this is going to be, right? Like, so if you want this to look like it's got some depth and dimension and it has some snow on it, now you're going to have to put that in. So I'm just going to go ahead and dilute what's on my watercolor brush. just by adding some water and diluting it down. And then I'm gonna do a ridge line here, and I'm gonna do one in front. And that all of a sudden gives me those two nice planes for which I can think about where the trees are gonna go. Now remember, if I bring the tree down right now, it's going to just go right into that wet watercolor. So you might wanna work just on top at first and not go all the way down. But let's just go ahead and lay in like the beginning of where this tree will be. So there. And then I'm gonna bring a branch across here as my basic branch, and one across here. Then probably one up. Again, just kind of developing the larger shapes in the trees, I find is like kind of easier. And then for balance, we just kind of want one here. I'm gonna add a little bit shadow to this side. And also, if you notice, I'm leaving a little bit of white space, so to speak, so that we have a little bit of texture. Grabbing a little more, we're gonna develop these branches out. So on some of the branches, I actually leave white space, and then on others, I do it differently. And it's mostly just so that I have, like, I don't get spindly looking branches. I like it to look like maybe it's got a little snow sitting on it, or, you know, something like that. And then as I go on this side, I'm gonna make it a lot lighter. It's getting into that ridge line. Bring some of the texture down. And then we're gonna just finish it off like this with just another bit. And add some water just to smooth that out. And that will kind of like make it look like it's just kind of going in. Now we're just gonna let it feed in. Just by charging it in, just to get that line shored up. And go back up to the top and just continue to do our fun little designs, making some thicker branches, thinner branches as it goes into the tree. Let's mix up some more watercolor. So I got my brown and my blue. And if it's slightly different, like maybe a little more bluey, you know, I really kind of like that, you know, as long as it's not bright and it's staying shadowy. I don't really mind if some of it is a little bit more blue, because I like the variation as long as I'm still in this main vein, you know, of just not a heavily contrasting color is what I'm trying to get away from. You know, like the brown here was really, really strong, and I like it, but I don't know, my vision was just for something not as strong, you know? Something that kind of like didn't distract me. I felt like having it be, like if it is too strong, I felt like it just kind of takes away from the design. Like I wasn't focused on the salt effects as much as I was looking at the brown. So that's why I decided to, you know, keep working it until I found like a better combination that just appealed to me, right? Does that make sense? As an artist, it just, some of them appeal more than others. So I'm developing out these little branches, and I'm kind of going very carefully because I don't want to over branch it. I really do want like a feeling of starkness a little bit, you know? I'm adding some texture, being really careful. So if I put too many branches in like I did here, I don't know, I felt like it took away from, again, the salt effect and made it look a little too busy. And that's some of that trial and error that maybe you'll get to gain from just by watching this video before you do your own. Yeah, see, it like looks a little more spooky this way, right? Maybe I'll just put another one just there a little bit. And let's get a little knobby here. Yep, I like that. Now, of course, most trees have a lot more branches than this, but I don't know. I've seen some that work like that. Now I'm going to lighten up the watercolor on my brush, and I'm going to go in the back here and just kind of develop out some more like smaller trees in the back. And then as they reach that back portion, I'm just going to randomly delete some of it. So you get that look, you know, like effortless look. Like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. Just delete some of it. You see how it kind of fades it into the background better. And so you don't have to drive yourself crazy about getting just the right color or waiting for it to dry and then like, oh, did it work? Did it not work? Just go ahead and take a paper towel and just partially delete it, and you'll end up with those nice little background trees without trying too hard. Now this is where the bigger brush comes in. You know, like I don't want to have to reload because I've got the right shadowy color for the background. And if I was running out of watercolor constantly, this would be a pain in the butt because some of it would be darker than lighter, but I can kind of keep going with this because it's just such a great juicy brush, you know? Cool, right? I ended up with a lot. And then maybe just shore up that line just a bit. And I think I'm actually going to give it a little bit of a shadow. So coming right from here, we're just gonna bring a shadow in. Maybe soften it on this side, make it harder on that side. Love it. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I like that. Okay, so in contrast, so see, this one was with more of the brown and some of the brown mixed with the blue right on paper. I didn't love it. I thought it was too stark. I thought it was too one way or the other. I really much like the more almost monochromatic look. I thought it was kind of, it reads better. It looks more professional. It's kind of like a little hack to make things look a little bit more, I don't know, dramatic, and let the painting actually come forward rather than the colors, right? Now I can see the effect dramatically, and this looks like a shadow tree. It looks really neat. So that's where I'm at, and that's how I got there. I just hope you guys get there too and see that your expectation for your painting matches your actual painting. If not, just keep trying, don't give up, and you got a lot of tips in this video for sure just by sticking with me. So thanks for your patience. Glad I didn't make you wait for the results because it took a long time for these to dry. Just so you know, you're gonna see this video and think, oh my god, it dried so fast. Nope, I stopped and waited literally 25 minutes in between takes. So it is really, really late right now. This video took forever to make, but I love you all and thank you so much for being part of our watercolor subscription. If you haven't signed up yet, I encourage you to get these in the mail. They are so much fun, and I will be back again for another video soon. Have a great one, and I hope you're having a wonderful holiday. Blessings to you all.